In this episode, I sit down with one woman striving to bridge the financial gap for women entrepreneurs. This woman is Rehana Malik-Mbanga, a serial social entrepreneur, an activist, speaker, and the CEO of Stimbok Corporation. Rehana's desire to support women with sustainable business solutions led to the birth of her business, Stimbok Corporation, where she is creating a platform for partners to invest in women of African heritage in Africa and Canada. Stimbok is supporting women in agriculture, business, and health. In agriculture, Stimbok is finding funding and technical assistance for viable business ideas for small and medium-sized enterprises. It is building sustainability and bridging gender gap inequality in parts of Africa, including Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. Rehana's vision at Stimbok is to train and provide farmland, tools, and inputs to as many female smallholder farmers as possible in Africa. This is the untold story of Rehana Malik-Mbanga.
My journey as an entrepreneur started as a very young girl. My father owned a business in Zambia. My mom comes from an entrepreneurial family as well. My grandfather and grandmother were farmers and also had a business as well. So from a very young age, I was exposed to business. I was exposed to entrepreneurship. And moving to Canada, I wanted to do more with myself and my life and my career, and entrepreneurship showed up for me in 2016, and I took the leap of faith. Stimbok is a sustainable development company. We have dabbled in renewable energy, innovation. Agriculture is our biggest focus at the moment, and recently we're working really hard to get more into the health space due to the pandemic. 2020, we got involved in PPE, noticed a lot of gaps in the market, in the health space, from diagnosis right until treatment to follow-up care and outpatient care. At the moment, Stimbok is busy working and focusing on the commodity space. We are working on creating a supply chain in the commodity space for fertilizer, sugar bean, soybean. The biggest challenge first starts with self, owning this space, learning. It has been a very big learning curve. You have an idea, you don't know how to get from A to B. I feel my biggest challenge is not having a mentor or a coach who has done this before, worked between two different countries or continents per se, doing trade and international development. The government of Canada has quite a few programs, but nothing very specific to what I'm doing. And so that has been the biggest challenge, is finding someone who's done what I've done. Our barriers are very similar. There are a lot of programs, a lot of opportunities that are out there for women of African heritage. But unfortunately, whether you live in Canada or whether you live in Africa, we don't have as much access, resources, finance towards the programs or projects we want to work in. For example, recent stats I was reading on women in science, African women in science. Women in science in general in the world don't get funded as much as men in innovation and science. And the same happens in Africa and in Canada. Black women in science, you won't get funded over your counterparts. And so these are the barriers Black women, women of African heritage face both in Africa and in Canada. We're faced with lack of opportunities, and the lack of opportunities can come in access to finance, access to programs that would propel us to do more, opportunities in the workspace that don't allow us to progress, lack of opportunities because maybe we sound different in our accent or we express ourselves very differently on paper. These are some of the issues we face both in Africa and here in Canada. So, first and foremost, business is about making money. And most people won't want to invest in something they feel won't make them a quick return or a return on their investment. If there are not any programs that encourage, so like a credit score system, for example, for women, made specifically for women, taking into consideration the barriers that exist, or probably even a program that can increase capacity in certain sectors for women so that we can see their full potential.
Absolutely.
Unless those programs are introduced, we won't really know how viable it is to invest in women. And so I find women are left in the informal sector. They're the biggest pushers in Africa, for example. In the informal sector, you will see women everywhere doing business. They will be doing business, but at a very small scale.
Yeah, like selling tomatoes,
Exactly.
Selling onions,
Cross-border trading,
chicken, that kind of stuff.
It would be women. And unfortunately, not enough research is done in those areas. Business plans created, people taking time to understand what is going on here. What are the trends? What are women actually doing? How can we increase their capacity? What can we do to make a woman that sells tomatoes understand the full supply chain? How do we get them to expand their business? So you're used to selling 10 crates of tomatoes. Maybe you could own a store that could manufacture tomatoes, like tomato sauce, package it in tins. Like there's other ways for us to do business. But unfortunately, we're not as exposed, or even if we were and we applied for grants or funding, we're less likely to be funded. So these are the gaps that have existed. And I like to look at trends. I'm always on social media. Because I have a psychology background, I notice a lot of things that other people wouldn't. I look at the social issues going on, and maybe I just see things differently from others. I see opportunities where people don't. And this is what has helped me with Stimbok. For example, I'll take a few steps back. A few years ago, I met a brilliant woman in Côte d'Ivoire, has an amazing project helping women farmers. So she trains women farmers, she trains them, gives them capacity. They grow vegetables to supply one of the biggest supermarket chains in Côte d'Ivoire.
Wow.
So Côte d'Ivoire in the past would import, and still does, import almost 90% of the produce from countries like France.
Wow.
Not even Nigeria, which is next door, or Ghana,
wow.
From France. And they would be flown in. So we're talking about produce like strawberries, peppers, things that could be easily grown in Côte d'Ivoire. And so she saw an opportunity and she moved forward. Fortunately for her at the time, the government did put in sanctions, or should I say programs, that did encourage farmers in Côte d'Ivoire to grow produce. So you would get incentives. There were incentives that were created. And so she took that step and she started creating a project like this. But I'll tell you, this project still today is not fully funded to where it should be. Wow. This project till today is looking for funding. Why? This is 5 years out. This project should be 10 years on another level. Well, I think in Africa, there are countries that are making quite a bit of progress. I will speak about Zambia, for example. There are projects that the Ministry of Agriculture is putting out there. I know Southern Africa, the SADC region, I'm not too sure about the rest of Africa, but the SADC region has zoned out areas which they call free trade areas that encourage more innovation, more business, more agriculture, those kind of businesses. That is what I am seeing.
at the moment? Well, there are great innovations that do exist already.
Okay.
They are Africans that have created apps, for example, that can monitor and evaluate how well a farmer is doing, for example. I think more money needs to be invested in those kind of projects because data is what we need. I think what we need is for example, let's backtrack to banks in Africa. To loan money from a bank in Africa, the interest rate is about 27 to 37%.
Wow.
Where in Canada, we're not talking those numbers. So first and foremost, to do business is very expensive. I think having a banking system that would have more loans. We're not asking for donations, and that has been the trend for many years, is donate, donate, donate. Africans just want money. We need money. And I beg to differ.
Absolutely.
I believe if we had access to the same kind of money that we have, for example, now that we're Canadian, we have access to financing that is very different to our counterparts in Africa. If African women had the same kind of access in terms of low interest loans, number one, that would be great. We had a better scoring system that allowed women, so a credit scoring system that looked at the real challenges that African women face and create something very unique to them. Taking into consideration most women run the home, are the breadwinners, even though we are from patriarchal societies.
Absolutely.
They send their children to school and they are feeding and clothing their children.
And still running a business.
And still running a business. And some of them putting themselves through school. So looking at all these things, creating more opportunities for African women to travel. Not every African wants to immigrate. And there is the perception once you give an African a visa, they don't want to leave the country.
Yeah.
Not every African wants
true.
to immigrate to a cold country like Canada. Living in Africa is a beautiful thing.
It's bliss.
Cities have grown, it's metropolitan, there's access to things. So creating actual exchanges. For example, I know Olds University has a great program during the summer where they can teach you capacity in agriculture. So creating agreements between maybe a university in Zambia or Nigeria that would allow an agricultural student to come here and have practicums and see how Canadians do business, what the challenges are, and vice versa. And then have a really meaningful exchange, really meaningful programs. And then also the biggest thing is having representation of African women in places where policies and these things are made, these decisions are made. That is the biggest thing, because you're not able to see the other side if you've never been there. Well, we recently named the non-for-profit When African Women Talk. And When African Women Talk has evolved from Women Talk Africa, which I started with Bridget Lassard-Dial. And Bridget owns Women Talk. And Women Talk is a just a talking space, a space where women could come and share their ordinary stories and find healing or empower or impact another person. And when I attended Women Talk in 2016 for the first time, I loved it. I loved that this was a place where I got to see Caucasian women vulnerable, see them like my mother, see them like myself, realize that women, regardless of what color your skin are, we face the same barriers.
Absolutely.
We face the same challenges. Where Black women still have systemic racism to face that Caucasian women don't have. That's another layer that we have, is systemic racism. But it was good to see that women equally were facing the same kind of challenges, and that I was not alone. And that if we band together, we could create an amazing space. And so Women Talk started as, Women Talk Africa started as a space just to bridge a gap between a racist gap and say, you're white, I'm black, but we go through the same things. Let's band together, and create a sisterhood. And that's what it started as. And once we had 1-2 events, I realized from my Black sisters, my African sisters, my Caribbean sisters, my mixed sisters, that they wanted more, that it was not enough to just come and have a space where we could talk about our issues. They wanted more, and they wanted to meet other women who were like-minded. They wanted to meet professionals. They wanted to have workshops and webinars. And so in the beginning, it was very overwhelming for me to try and fit myself into this space. But as I have evolved in my place as well as the CEO of Stimbok, I think I'm in a better position to offer more and create a space that the women in this city are looking for. One thing that is very common in my conversations of women of color in Canada is they are not satisfied in their roles. Majority of women of color do not feel that they're used to their full potential. We have a lot to offer. We have a lot of experiences, but we're boxed and we're not given leadership roles. There is not enough representation in managerial roles, in leadership roles throughout many provinces, even in our province here in Alberta, of high-profiled Black women, women of color. And so this is a dissatisfaction, a constant conversation of how women want to do more, but are not given the space to.
Absolutely. And that takes me back to one of the events at When African Women Talk that I attended. And one of the ladies in there, when she spoke, she said she was looking for a promotion, I think it was, and she had asked the person, and it was, I guess, a boardroom filled with Caucasian men and women, and she had asked, how do you see me when you see a Black woman?
Right.
And in comment, she said one of the women in there, a Caucasian woman, had been open to share, to say, I don't see you, like, I see Black women in healthcare roles and teaching roles and different types of roles, but not in the type of space that that the speaker was talking about. So this really reminds me of that, and how it's important as to how we've boxed Black people into a certain category that is now difficult for society to see us elsewhere.
So you're just a caregiver and nothing more.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what is next for Stimbok?
For Stimbok, Stimbok will be working this year, focusing on 5 Canadian women that are currently working to take their business, their Canadian business, to Africa. And we're working currently on developing those projects, developing the international development side of their businesses, and how Stimbok can use the experiences and expertise that we have to help them penetrate the African market. And that's what we're doing. For me, showing how valuable we are and how much we have to contribute both in Canada and in our motherland is very, very important and is one of my priorities. Stimbok has been working in the agriculture space, so we will continue to work on the agricultural projects that we've been on. We have a bean project that we're working on to grow 5 million metric tons of soybean and sugar bean in the next 5 years.
Wow.
And we're hoping to max up on that. Soybean and sugar beans are a very hot commodity, and creates both import and export for Africa, which means access to foreign exchange, for example. So being able to really see how those projects create economic development in the countries that we've chosen.
Stimbok recently launched a bean project in Africa with a goal of growing up to 1 million tons of soybean and sugar bean for exportation and consumption, creating an increase in local production in regions across Tanzania, Uganda, Malawi, and Zambia. Rehana is also the founder of the nonprofit called When African Women Talk, a platform creating a safe space for Canadian women of African heritage to share their stories to support personal growth and development.